Hi, welcome to Infinite Leaders Live. I'm Lewis Keynes, and our why, as ever, is simple: to be better educators and to be better humans. We want everybody, regardless of role, rank, and responsibility, to be better and to be willing to listen and to learn to others and hopefully improve in whatever it is that they're doing and be infinite learners. Today is a little bit different. Today's episode is Alan and I reviewing the first 23 Infinite Leaders Live episodes, something a little bit different and reflective. How are you getting on, Alan? All right?
Yeah, great, Lewis. And I think it's going to be quite an interesting episode today where we can really get stuck in and look at some of the key lessons and the real life people, real life experiences that we've listened to. And I've certainly learned loads, and it'd be nice to touch upon what we've learned.
We're sort of winging this one as we go through, aren't we, Al? So we'll see how it goes without a real set structure, without a guest to sort of make us two shut up and listen. It might be one of those that's successful, it might not be. But I think Alan and I are quite united in the fact that we really wanted to just pause and take a moment to be thankful and to show a lot of gratitude to the guests that we've had, but also to touch upon some of those key themes, as Alan mentioned, and to really start to explore, what our learning process has been through this. We very much practice what we preach, and we live and breathe the kind of vision that we have to be better educators and to be better humans. And the influence that a great deal of people have had on that across our lives, and especially over the last 3 or 4 months during these podcasts has been quite humbling. And we're really pleased to have had such incredible conversations with people. So if you want to have a look or a listen to any of those episodes, please find us on Instagram or theinfinitelearners.com, all Apple podcast platforms and other podcast platforms. All our episodes are available on there. So have a little look and a listen and let us know what you think. We're always willing to listen to feedback, whether that be constructive or whether that be a little bit of praise for us. It's always nice to hear our listeners' opinions. So get in touch with us and let us know what you think. Alan, let's give this one a whirl, shall we?
Yeah, let's give it a go, What's really interesting at this point now, we're 23 episodes in. I think we started just after lockdown in Manila, sort of March, April time. We started writing our articles and developing our website. And then we thought, let's give a podcast a go. And certainly from my perspective, it's been a massive learning process. And what do you think you've learned about yourself, Lewis, in this process?
Great question. And this is the moment where I wish we'd have scripted this a little bit more. No, I think to be honest with you, I've learned loads about myself, and I've learned loads about theoretical and applicational leadership. I think about myself, just in terms of this whole lockdown process and the process of putting a podcast together, is that you often get it right before, you get it wrong before you get it right. And I'm a big believer of that anyway, and even more so from the experiences we've had in the last couple of months. I'm really, really pleased we took the plunge that we did. I remember those conversations really well. I think our first episode was actually not until June with Simon Mann, and we had a conversation before it where we talked about doing a podcast and the whys and wherefores, and we didn't really know where to start, and we sort of laughed at each other, even having the kind of audacity to suggest that us two that had never even picked up a microphone and we can boast only basic IT skills could put together a podcast that people will actually be interested in. And again, the sort of outcome has been really humbling to get the thousands of downloads that we've had, and the followers that are following the kind of work that we're doing, and the questions and the interactions from our audience has been great. And that's all been a bit of a byproduct, but the best bit for me is just having learning conversations every week. Every week we've spoken to somebody who we have the utmost respect for, and who has shared with us some vulnerabilities, shared with us some real gems of wisdom, as Alan would say, and also shared with us their sort of journey and the way that they got to where they have. And it's been nice to see, there's no magic bullet that gets you to where you want to go. You have to go through the hard yards and the graft. And certainly that was a nice reminder, selfishly, before starting a new school and a new role. And I imagine that's very similar for you, Al.
Yeah.
But, it gave you that little step up for you to think, you know what, there's no right or wrong way of doing this. And you go and you make your own sort of journey, and you blaze your own trail. that's essentially what you need to keep doing. And you do that with some confidence sometimes, and you do that sometimes where you doubt yourself and you have to check yourself regularly. Sometimes you do that on your own. Sometimes you do it collaboratively. Sometimes you get it wrong. And I'm certainly much more forgiving of myself from speaking to so many high profile people that have been quite open in saying how they've got it wrong and what they've learned. And I've really enjoyed that process of just starting to understand that that's fine and that's normal, and that there isn't necessarily a pressure or a time limit on getting it right and moving forward and making an impact. And sometimes that takes longer than you want. Sometimes it happens quicker. Sometimes people are on board. Sometimes that takes a little bit more work. And all those things are normal, and all those things are just part of leadership. They're things I've experienced before, many of them, but also hearing it from other people is also affirming and reassuring in many ways. So that's sort of my reflections so far on where we're at, and I really look forward to moving forward and doing some more episodes. How about you, Alan? Any of that resonate with you, or am I talking a lot of rubbish?
No, you usually talk a lot of rubbish, so that's just normal. So. From me, probably a little bit more short and succinct as it normally is, but no, a lot of that resonates. And from my perspective, I've been teaching 10 years more than you, and a little bit older than you, and with a family. The imposter syndrome that's quite prevalent in our guests, I suppose I've sort of felt that, and I thought, as I setting up a podcast, who are we to set up a podcast? Are we good enough? Have we got enough experience? Have we done this? Have we done that? And I think the answers that our leaders on the show have said is, look, just give it a go. And I think that's what we did. Although we put in a hell of a lot of research and work into doing it, as we always do, I think it is about just giving things a go. And it's inspired me to go on and apply for a master's. And I'm going to be starting that in February. And I don't think I would have done that without the confidence that's come from the conversations we've had with people, and realizing that, you know what, I'm good enough to do that as well as have a job. I can do it. It's given me a little bit more belief and like you said there, a bit more self-assurance in what we're doing is actually good. And what we're trying to do in schools is good. And the way we're trying to lead people is good. And it was just having that affirmation from people and learning from them as well, that it's okay, you can doubt yourself and you can have those moments where you don't feel good enough. But you know what? Go and give it a go. Go out and put yourself out there, get out your comfort zone. And that's the main thing I think I've got from it, Lewis, to be quite honest.
I think it's interesting you use that terminology, you know, what we're trying to do is good, what we're doing is good. You know, and I'd probably argue, and it might just be semantics, that it's the best thing for whether it's the kids or it's what we feel is best at this moment in time. And you know, moving forward, I think it's quite evident, having spoken to so many great people over the past 3 or 4 months, that changes and that evolves. And I know that doing a master's was something that you discussed and we've chatted about several times over the last few years. So what made that change in your mind from it being something that actually you didn't really want to do, or you thought might be a hassle, to actually that's probably the best thing or the best decision that you can make now?
Yeah, good call. It's always been niggling away at me, and I know I've wanted to do it for a number of years, and then you sort of family gets in the way, and then your new job, and just, you can always put barriers there. You can always think, well, what if? And you know what? It's the right time. It really is the right time. I've started my new job. I'm comfortable in what I do. I'm comfortable in how I lead people. I still want to get better, and I think, having spoke to Steve Salis on our podcast, and he talked about a master's being the best thing he's ever done. And something resonated with that. And he then moved on to working in the football industry from being a teacher. And I think an educational leadership in practice, which is the course I'm going to do, will allow me to flourish with the new school that we're at, it's primary at the moment, and it'll grow into a senior school over a 10, 15-year project. And I would love the experience from the masters to take me forward into that sort of that senior management role, which I've always sort of put off, because once again, probably those feelings of imposter syndrome and being comfortable in the PE work that I do. But I think now is the time to make that next step, and to have that masters behind me and dealing with policy, dealing with the stuff that I wouldn't necessarily have done just as a as a PE leader, I think it's going to be just good for me personally and give me a bit of weight to everything that I'm doing as well. How about you? What do you think your next steps will be from what we've done?
Good question. I was just going to ask you actually before I go into that, just because it's linked. We've talked a lot in the podcast about context and how important context is, and you can't just apply a decision across anything. So in terms of your context now with going on to further study, what gives you that kind of thought that this is the right time to do it?
Yeah, that's a good call. It's hard to explain, Lewis, to be quite honest. I just feel I've got the confidence and the experience in which I can actually add value. I think as a 21-year-old going and doing a master's in educational leadership, I don't think you've got that wealth of experience to actually have a significant amount of value to it. I think being in leadership for over 20 years and having the ideas to back up the theory, I think that's has considerable weight. If you just have theory and then you're trying to apply it into practice, I think that might be quite difficult. But having seen many situations and felt many situations and dealt with many situations in the past years, particularly internationally, I just feel as if it's that time where I can utilize what I've done and then move it to the next level.
So you, having applied a lot of it already, you're interested in learning in the theory side of things off the back of speaking to the people that we've spoken to over the last 3 or 4 months.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a good shout in terms of some of those people we've spoke to haven't got master's degrees, they haven't got qualifications, they've got, as our tagline, real life experience, they haven't been on courses. It's the whole thing about gaining experience and then being able to go back to the theory and being research driven. I think it's really powerful and certainly prevalent in education at the moment.
I like that. I think you're right, and I agree with you around, there isn't a set of expectations or qualifications that will get you to do a job really, really well. It doesn't matter what it is, whether, we've talked obviously widely around leadership and mainly subject specifically within PE and wellbeing, but there isn't a set of things that you need or a set of letters by your name or a set of courses ticked off or experiences gained that will necessarily make you the right person in any context. And I think it's that willingness that you're really showing here, as somebody who's been teaching 20 odd years, to have the humility to stop and be a bit like, hang on, I'm going to do a master's and I'm not doing it just to fill time or to say I've got a master's, but you're going to go and do it because you're really interested in how to get better and improve. I think, that speaks volume, and there's a lot of people your age that wouldn't even entertain that kind of decision, I imagine.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think I talked to Simon McMenny about this. You hit your 40s and you hit a crossroads. You're either on pipe and slippers waiting to retire, or you go and make a significant difference in everything that you do. And I'd like to think I've gone down that line rather than waiting for a retirement line. I mean, your 10 years, you've got at least 10 years on me. What do you think about that?
Yeah, at the moment, it would literally just be an issue of looking at time and the constraints that I've got with starting a new role in a busy school across 2 campuses. That's just not going to happen for the time being. But it's not to say it's something that I wouldn't go back to studying in the future. A colleague of mine, I've spoke to him several times, that he's currently finishing a PhD, and his kind of outlook on things is very leadership based and very steeped in research and science backed. And he speaks with real enthusiasm about going through that process, and he loves it. So it's something that I'm definitely open to. And a little bit like you, I think it's something that maybe when I was younger, I sort of felt that maybe you were a bit obliged to do certain levels of study because, it looked good on your CV, or it might give you a bit of a step up within a job. And I was always, and I spoke to you about this several times, haven't I? I was always resistant to do it for those reasons. I wanted to do it because I actually really wanted to do it. And a little bit like you, over the last 3 or 4 months, having that confidence now of thinking, well, there is enough out there to learn without a shadow of a doubt. There's plenty we don't know, but also that you know, you're not going into that and judging yourself anymore. You're not going into that situation of studying, you know, trying to prove anything to yourself. You're going in because you're curious, and you're going in because you want to be better, and you're going in for what I would go back to what you said earlier, for good things, for the right reasons, you know, whether it's good things or whether it's because you're going in for the right reasons. I think that gives you a much stronger foundation to build upon, that allows you then to make decisions not because you think that others might think it's the right thing to do, but because you want to yourself. I can't remember who the psychologist is. I know Brené Brown talks about it, but there's a few others that say the same kind of thing about, you know, you want to talk to yourself as if you are the really supportive roommate that you've got. You know, there's a Naval talks about it on Twitter. He's a very philosophical guy. And that voice in your head is your constant roommate for the rest of your life. And if that voice in your head is conflicting what you're saying and is in many ways winding you up through your life, you're going to find it really, really tough to live with that voice in your head. And you've got to find a way of calming that and of getting to know yourself a little bit more. And whether that's through practices of mindfulness, or whether that's through learning, or whether that's through just becoming more comfortable with who you are, I think they're all good things. And I think that, again, speaking to really prominent, strong, progressive leaders over the last 3 or 4 months has allowed us to start to realize that everybody's got that roommate in their head. I think that's the point I'm trying to come back to. Everybody's got that sort of voice that doubts them, and that little voice that nags away at them. And if you can make that voice positive more often than not, you're going to generally be a much more happy person with a good outlook on life.
No, I agree. And when we look at our guests, and I suppose a lot of people wouldn't have that positive aspect. The negative aspect would stop you from doing all those things that associate with imposter syndrome. And I've just been reading Ant Middleton's new book, Zero Negativity, and he's one of the most positive guys I think I've ever seen on TV or read about.
I hope so, with a book title like that, to be honest.
It's a fantastic book, and I would fully recommend it to anybody. It's not research driven, it's all about his experiences. But what I really like in the book is how his wife at the end of each chapter actually then is his other side. She's the cautious side, but she brings it back to reality, because it almost is impossible to be 100% positive all the time. We always have those negative thoughts. And as you say, it's, can you get that friend? Is it going to be a critical friend, or is it going to be a positive friend encouraging you? And when we look at some of our podcasts, you think about Simon McMenemy, who went from Worthing in the UK non-league team to managing the Philippines national team, playing in a Asian Cup game, and there's 70,000 in Vietnam. Pretty incredible. How much must he have felt out of his depth there? And he just went for it. You look at Anna Power, who was currently my boss at DQ in Riyadh. She's gone from being a deputy head in Manila, and now she's taken on her first headship. She will have had those doubts in her mind, and she's, you know what, she's put them to one side, she's gone for it, and she's doing great. And Gemma Chambers from New Zealand, who gave up a really good life in Hong Kong, moved out to New Zealand to help start up the Green School. All these people had imposter syndrome and all had those doubts, and all came out with a positive mindset to go and make a difference. And that was a real sort of, not a tipping point, but it made me realize that, you know what, just go on and do your masters, go on and try and be the better version of yourself, because you'll regret it if you don't.
And seeing those inspirations from other people, I think Simon Mann we should add to that list, in terms of going from a head of a small school of several hundred kids in Hong Kong to going into his first role that he talked about so well on our first episode of garden school, and 2,300 children or whatever it is there, and hundreds of staff, and the sort of realization he had of, wow, this is a huge job. And I love the quote he talked about change is like an oil tanker. It takes forever to start, but once you start that change, you know, you can't stop it. It's going to fly around. And I think it's things like that start to give you confidence when you're making these big life decisions on whether you're going to go and study and commit 2 or 3 years to that, or whether you're going to go and move country and start a new school. And you're right. And I think you get loads of confidence, but also really interestingly, you get a bit of a stop feeling sorry for yourself moment. I don't know if you have that, where you're a bit like, you know what, you're not the only person in the world that's ever gone and done something that they feel a bit scared about. You know, it's almost that roommate in your head is saying, you know, it's not all about you. You know, there's hundreds of people just within the city you're in, millions across the world that feel exactly like you do, for whatever reason, in whatever change in your life is occurring. And I think, again, you know, listening to some of our guests, that comes across in spades, doesn't it?
Totally. And you think back to the Jake Humphrey episode where he struggled at school. He failed his A levels, didn't really like it, but just showed a little bit of resilience and perseverance. So you look where he is now. I'm watching the Blades yesterday, and he's presenting, and I'm like, oh, he failed, and he persevered, and he struggled, and he persevered, and he cracked on, and you just think, yeah, you know what? Just give stuff a go, and that comes through in spades, doesn't it? Through our interviews about people just overcoming problems, failing, and just showing that little bit of character, we used to call it. I mean, we can break character down into so many values now, and we're almost gone towards trying to teach character. And yeah, it's that resilience, and it's a buzzword at the moment, isn't it? And how do you actually teach that? I mean,
Well, I think
do we teach resilience?
I think it's really difficult to teach and to assess resilience in itself. I think it's more of a byproduct and something that happens along the way towards something that really means something to you. You know, in your masters, as an example, you know, that you'll need that because there'll be ups and downs as you're moving towards any kind of achievement in life. It's going to be tough, but I think that comes back a lot of it to positivity, and who you surround yourself with. And I know, you know, Jake talked about that, about, you know, being able to take responsibility and not try and blame other people, but look at yourself. Steve talked about how important Steve Wade talked about how important his wife was when he had his under the floorboards moment for.
I love that. That's one of my favourite moments.
Working for the gas company, he's like, what am I doing under here? And I need to go and change it and do what I love. And his wife was really supportive in that. You know, Rebecca Russell talked a hell of a lot about time invested in people, but also that really nice sort of mantra that her father gave her about surrounding herself with really positive people and people who want to dream and people who want to move forward and get better. You know, how important is that generally in life? How important is it to surround yourself with positive people that give you energy and not people that sap the energy out of you?
It's so important, and I can come back to that power of the Power of Positivity book. And when Ant Middleton was in the Paras, he said he was sucked into the Paras drinking culture, and then he joined the Marines, and it was a little bit more professional, and then he joined the Special Forces, and it was incredibly professional. But it was totally about the environment that he was in. If he was in a negative environment where it was spiraling out of control, he would be consumed in that. And it was only when he actually took himself away, and he actually spent some time in jail after assaulting a police officer through the negativity that drinking spiral he was in, he then realized that he had to just surround himself with these positive people. And I think that I really like is that if you meet someone that you've not sort of been in contact with for 10, 15 years, and they come up to you and then you have a chat for a bit and they'll say, oh, Lewis, you've really changed. I wouldn't take that as a negative. I think that's a massive positive. If you're the same person you were 10, 15 years ago, you've not moved on. And I love that expression that if I could go back and meet the people from 10, 15, even 20, 30 years ago for me, because I'm old enough, I'd love them to say, oh, you've really changed. You know what, you've turned out into a fairly decent human being, rather than, oh, you're the same guy off the council estate in Sheffield. You know what I mean? I'd like to think internationally I've moved about and I've developed a little bit of values that are worldly rather than being back, like I say, back in that council estate.
Yeah, I listened not long ago to Simon Sinek's podcast called A Touch of Optimism, and it was one of his first 2 or 3 episodes. Really good podcast, really enjoyed it. And it was about how if he isn't feeling like he's getting positivity and support from his friends and he isn't able to provide that to his friends, that he just sends them an email basically ending that friendship.
I've
which,
read that somewhere before. Yeah,
yeah,
that's
which was an incredible thing that I thought about. And, you know, everybody's made friendships in the past and everybody's broken friendships in the past, and people do it in all sorts of different ways. You know, whether it's rightly or wrongly with any of these, whether it's ignoring somebody and they get the message, or whether it's a big fallout and a big hoo-ha, or whether it's something in between. But Simon Sinek has a method of basically emailing his friends, being a bit like, you know, last few times we've met, I've just felt sapped of my energy. You know, I've not really felt like you've returned my calls and that you really care. I've not felt like you're there for me. So, you know, we are probably going to end this friendship where it is. You know, thanks for what we've done so far. And if you feel any different and you want to make an effort with changing it, then let me know. And he said the two friends, I think it was 2 or 3 that he sent it to, never heard back from them.
wow. That's
You're like,
it's brutal
that's
honesty, but
interesting.
you're doing it for self-preservation purposes, aren't you? And I love that. And it makes me think of our podcast with Damien Hughes, which it just an inspirational 45 minutes in my life that
Mm.
I could watch it over and over again because I just get something different from it every time. And to flip that on its reverse, having those cultural architects in our surrounding ourselves with those type of people and having them in your workplace are so important. And I love the FIFO expression that he came out with as well. But yeah, it is. You're completely right. If you've got people around you that, you know what, not giving you anything, why are they in your lives? You've got to question that, haven't you?
You have, but it's whether, again, this comes, you know, it was the book that you were talking about earlier, Joe Ehrman, was it, about
Yeah.
transactional versus transformative coaching? And if you take the coaching away from it, friendships can be transactional or transformational, right? You know, the best
True.
friendships you have are friendships where you're not keeping score, you're not keeping count, and they're relationships that might be friendships, or they're also relationships with colleagues at work, or relationships with acquaintances in the neighborhood. If you're counting and you're keeping a score of how many times they've asked you for a favor compared to them, you know, in essence, you're acting like a small child would in terms of praise and reward. I know that when we spoke to Ryan Campbell, he talked a lot about the opposite of what we've mentioned here. He talked about, you know, trying to surround yourself with a few people who don't agree with everything you're saying. You know, and I think there's a difference, isn't there, between surrounding yourself with positivity and people with morals and a strong sort of moral compass compared to just yes people and people
Mm.
that are just around you to agree.
Good point. And what I took from Ryan was that wall. Remember the wall he talked about? Oh my gosh, that was incredible. And the fact that he's
The
got
wall
two.
of shame.
Yeah, and we coined his new nickname, didn't we? Like Ryan Two Kimballs Campbell. But what I liked from him was that go onto Twitter and choose someone who you wouldn't normally follow, who's totally the opposite of you, and see what they've got to say, and try and gather opinion because you can surround yourself with an echo chamber, can't you? And when we read the book from Matthew Said that talks about diversity, that really resonated with me, is to get people who do have a diverse opinion, and it does really help in decision making process.
Yeah, I took on board that what Ryan said, and I do that on Twitter. If somebody writes something that, you know, is inflammatory, or I get that immediate feeling of what, no way, I'll deliberately follow them now to try and, I think, just to make myself a little bit more balanced in realizing that, again, people don't have the same opinions, and it's good to disagree, and it's good to have those conversations around why you disagree if you're moving in the same direction. The problem sometimes on Twitter is you're that far apart in terms of polar views that you're never going to be able to understand what their point is, but it gets you used to the fact that other people have different views. And Steve Salis talked a lot about that, didn't he, on our show, about how your lens on the world is very, very different to my lens on the world. And I'm not going to be able to understand yours unless you tell me and explain and I listen. And you're never going to understand mine unless you'd let me do the same. And it was about circling back and coming back to that kind of idea. And Ryan went to the extreme with that, with his wall of shame. So for those people who haven't listened, Ryan talked about any mistake you've made or email that you've got that's negative, stick it on your wall and it'll remind you of the things that maybe you're flawed in and that you need to be a bit better at. Now, I don't know about you, Alan, but personally for me, I'd walk into work and be absolutely devastated if that was the first thing I saw in the morning.
Yeah, there's there's a couple of ways. Maybe my younger self would have been fueled, motivated by that. But I think my older self, yeah, I don't need that negativity. And I don't think I think it would almost cause a bit of resentment in me. So yeah, I don't know if it worked for me, if it worked. And that's the power of diversity. What works for one person doesn't work for another. And I think as you get older, you start to see that a lot more. And Steve did talk about that. And as I said earlier, Steve did sort of inspire me to go on and do a master's. And he's a no fluff, be honest kind of guy. And we took a lot from that. And from our perspective there is do we surround ourselves with people who believe in the same things as us, or do we have a team that is culturally opinionated, that you don't necessarily have to be friends? Can you have a team that's like that, that's effective?
Yeah, I'm all for that. I think that the more a team can work towards the same kind of goal, but along the way towards that goal, check in with each other, find out where those disagreements are and call each other on them in a safe environment is exactly the right thing to do. And again, that comes back to being transformative for me and not transactional. It's not trying to pick fault in somebody's idea because it was their idea and not yours. That's just ego. You know, it's not trying to say it has to be done in a set and specific way unless you've got research and evidence that says that really it should. And I understand that. But it's essentially trying to say that along this journey, we will meander, we will go in different directions, but the end point is the same for all of us, and what we're working towards is really important. And I think that's a strong starting point for any kind of relationship or conversation, you know, whether it's professionally or whether it's just with a friend and a pal. You know, you have to have that same kind of outlook on what you want from life or work or a project to be able to even find some common ground, do you think?
Yeah, yes, and I agree entirely. And once again, once upon a time, I just wanted a team that all thought like me, and
Yeah.
I've realised that that's totally not the game. You wouldn't get anywhere really if that was the case. But as a youngster, you don't really know any different unless you're being taught. And I think Scott, one of my best friends, Scott Barlow, was on the show. He talked very much about you don't know what you don't know, and I love that expression. And you've got to assume that people don't know, and it's something that we're trying to break across with a concept-based learning we've done with Julie Stern, and actually identifying concepts and clarifying misunderstandings is something that as a teacher and as a leader, sometimes you just presume that people know stuff. And I think just taking a step back and let's just presume that people don't know and clarify and presume positive intentions is really, really important. And Scott phrase now in it, that phrase that you use, common sense is not very common. Yeah. Absolutely love that. Love that.
Yeah. No, it's a belter. And what you've just mentioned's correct for me. I think where that breaks down and where that's difficult is when you have relationships, whether professionally or with friends, where maybe there isn't that sort of acceptance that the improvement can happen and that improvement is a possibility. I think for me, speaking to all these leaders and applying it to different circumstances that I found myself in the past, you know, for an outcome to be positive between any two people, you've both got to want to learn from that outcome. If one comes in with a really stubborn viewpoint of this has to be done in this way, or this decision should be made because of X, Y, and Z, oftentimes that's a negative way of approaching these things, because then you're in a position where, you know, your ego's talking and there can't be any kind of outcome that appeases two people. So you're almost setting yourself up to break or damage a relationship because of the fact that either the person you're speaking to or yourself is being too stubborn. You've got to go into that open-minded that this is the area we're moving towards and what we've got to make a decision around. Actually, the way that that's done, does it necessarily matter to the nth degree compared to the fact that you're actually making progress and moving forward?
Yeah, good point. And I think it comes back to, Lewis, relationships, doesn't it? Everything comes back to relationships. And I've certainly found that probably more so in the last 8 years of my career. I mean, beforehand, I can be quite reflective and say I was a bit more about myself in my 20s, and I do regret that now. I think moving internationally and living in communities where the teachers that you teach with are often your friends in the community you also have relationships with, I think is so important. And Rebecca's tagline is time invested in people is never ever wasted time. And it's so true. And moving to the new school for me now has been all about making relationships, not touching too much about pedagogy or pushing values and my standards. It was more about making the relationships, and then you can move on to addressing those other things. Because if they don't like you, or there isn't a connection with you, or you might say they don't have to like you, but if there isn't that connection and you haven't made that effort to actually have a bond and have some common ground, I don't think you can actually get many places in leadership. You've got to have those relationships. And I love the story with Ted and the stuff that he does. Ted's one of the most positive guys I've ever met in my life. And if you remember the walking down the corridor,
Yeah, I do
and
remember,
the students asking him why he's smiling, and he's going, well, why not? I'm happy, I'm positive. And they were grumpy, and then he kept going back every day the same, just trying to make those connections. And he does that. And that's why we got him on the show, because he's just 45 minutes of pure positivity. And that for me is key. And the relationships that you make is crucial in leadership. Would you agree?
I would. And Ian Deeth's another one that was really positive, wasn't he? About, how very focused he is on getting what he wants out of the day and being positive along that way. I think what I'd probably throw in there into the mix is that to have that positive relationship, again, I think it comes back to both parties wanting to be open to learn and to connect, and for both parties to be humble enough to say, I don't know it all, whether that be the leader or the person within a team, whether that be a colleague that you're on even keels with, whether that be a friend from when you're a kid, or whether that be a new friend you've just met in your neighborhood. There's got to be an assumption that both people want to learn and move forward. And like you've said, sometimes that taking that stance of assuming positive intentions is such an important first step to appreciate that this person's only making the decisions or sharing with me what they're feeling because they want to do the best they can. And Nate Babcock talked about it really well, about everybody just wants to do well and be well. Nobody's in life trying to get through life trying to not be well and not do well. It's just that some people might understand how to get there a little bit quicker than others, and they might have some tips. And I think for me, a lot of this comes back to identity. And MJ, Melissa Jacob, talked about identity so well, as an American born to two Filipino parents that grew up in America and then moved to the Philippines, having never been to the Philippines before, but looking obviously like a Filipino and being in a culture around people who presumed she was one of them, but not really feeling like she was one of them because her upbringing was so different. I think for me, a lot of what you've talked about there about connection and about creating connection with people is fueled and is allowed to happen when people understand themselves and know who they are. And I think that makes connection so much easier, because people have a good understanding of who they are in terms of whether it's what makes them tick, whether it's what they're trying to find in life, whether it's a purpose and a why, like we've talked about, whether it's what they will put up with and what they won't put up with, and they understand why they will and they won't, whether it's values, whether it's just knowing themselves and being comfortable with who they are and enjoying day to day. I think there's a lot of conflict in relationships because maybe a person doesn't know quite who they are. And new information can maybe make that relationship quite difficult in terms of the fact that the person that you're speaking to or yourself in many respects can't quite picture where this is going because it doesn't really fit with who you are. Or again, going back to that idea of maybe you don't know who you are yourself. Am I rambling a lot? I think I am. I feel like I am, but you get the idea.
No, I totally get it, mate. And you always ramble. Don't worry, it's okay. The MJ story resonates a lot because of my kids. And you think about, my kids are generally very, very fortunate, but they're 11 years old. They were born in Qatar in 2009. They spent their first 3 years in Qatar. They then moved to the Philippines for 8 years. We've just moved to Saudi Arabia when they're 11 years old. Now, they're having a few identity issues because Philippines is their home, really. Yet their home has been told that they're from Sheffield in England. Yet they were born in Qatar. Now they live in Saudi and they're trying to find connections here, which I'll be quite honest, they're finding hard at the moment. They've moved away from everything that was familiar. They've moved away from people who loved and cared for them and who were who are going to be their lifelong friends, but do have bonds that are really hard to break. And it's been tough. It's been a really tough, and I really felt for MJ. She told that story, and I'm really feeling it now for my kids. And you wonder that third culture kid, or that the identity that those people who live abroad, do they actually suffer, or do you think they actually have a good deal? I don't know how. You haven't got kids yet, Lewis. How do you see it from a different perspective?
Oh, I can only talk about my own experiences really in this, and moving country is tough, and moving from a really tight knit friendship group that you've taken 7 years to build to one where you don't know anyone is really hard. And I think as adults, because we're adults and we're a little bit more set in our ways and a little bit more generally as an adult population, I think unfortunately a little bit less open to new ideas and meeting new people than children are. I think children have got it much easier, but at the same time, I think for children it's a bigger problem in the short term because they can't see the end to it. I think as adults we know that with time and with care and with connection and relationships, we'll get that back, it'll come. But children can't see that, of course. Children just see the here and now. So I do think in many respects that the likelihood of them building connections and relationships is much more likely than adults, and much, much quicker than adults because of the nature of kids. But at the same time, that will feel longer for them. And I'm sure that you're sort of seeing that at the minute.
Yeah, I mean, we've been here 3 weeks. The transformation just on getting them out and playing, and I think comes back to what Nate talks about, play through it, emancipation as he called it.
Yeah.
I'm seeing it, that transformation now where my kids finish online school. Online school's not great. It's the best that it can be at the moment. But at 3 o'clock, I'm just looking at now, it's 3 p.m. here now, and hopefully they're off out, they're making friends, they're out playing, and it's connections through play. What about those poor kids that are stuck to a device from the moment they wake up to the moment they go to bed? Are they making, even though they've got online friends, is that a genuine connection compared to a physical relationship where you are interacting, you're seeing the mannerisms, you can judge conflict better? I just feel as if they've become different kids as soon as they've got those physical friends now rather than online friends.
Yeah, well, I think you're in a unique position. You've got twins, so maybe this is a research project moving forward for the next 4 weeks. Stick one of them on a device for 13 hours a day, and let the other one go out and play. But I think we know the answer to that from a lot of the research we've read and the conversations we've had. But nothing beats real life connection, and online learning does make that feel quite distant, and it does make a bit of a, not just a physical distance, of course, but also a bit of a disconnect between you and pals that, you want to, whether it's give them a hug or shake their hand, or whether you just want to be around those people, that's tough. And again, that resonates with us having moved to new countries and not being around the people that we've trusted for so many years. And again, it'll be tough for kids, but yeah, let me know how that experiment goes. Stick one of them on an iPad and let the other one go out and play.
Well, it's as daft as it seems. Right? When I think about those kinds of situations, it also takes me back to the interviews with Baz Rathbone and Matty Piper, who are living our dream. Our dream was to be professional footballers. It didn't quite work out that way, but they did. But it was like their living nightmare to actually be in that situation. And the stuff that Baz went through, and Matty's story about being on the grave of his dad and taking tablets and waking up in rehab, and Baz not wanting to play and almost like injuring himself so he didn't have to turn up. Like that kind of thing. I was absolutely shocked and surprised by that. I don't know about you.
Yeah, no, I was, yeah. Especially Baz's about, back in the day when he's surrounded by, back then, what were proper men playing football? You know, no punches were pulled at all, and everything mattered, and everything was all in. Matty, I think I could empathise with Matty a little bit more, just in terms of it being a bit closer to my age group. But what I really liked about Baz was the vulnerability he showed to just be able to share those things, because somebody of his age, you know, doesn't stereotypically do that. You know, he comes from that kind of era where you just shut up and get on with it, and you don't worry about it. And I think that just having people have those conversations is really, really healthy. You know, linking it to kids, I remember Gene Hussey's episode about talking about how, you know, it isn't the athlete you're seeing when a gymnast performing in front of you, it's the child you're seeing. And if you don't see the child, there's a problem there. And to see the child, to really see the child, that needs to be a team effort between coach, whoever's in charge of the program that's directing that coach, the child and the parents. And you've got to sort of triangulate that coach, parent and child relationship to be able to get the best for the kids. And that only comes with having a real holistic knowledge of children and caring for children. And I think a lot of that kind of care and holistic view is something that's missing in competitive sport. And we're fortunate to be able to have within PE in an education setting.
Yeah, and that comes back to Nick Dunn, isn't it? Where he was a high-level gymnast who's then become a teacher, and he's now a very successful leader in UWC Singapore. And he talked about the transformation he made. At first, he was very much teaching as he was coached and in that very gymnastics way. And then he actually realised that alienated a lot of kids, and his values changed, and the way he leads his team has changed. And you've got to credit Nick there for a huge transformation in terms of his leadership. And as you touched upon earlier, I'm reading the book by Joe Ehrman, and that's highly recommended by John O'Sullivan in his work on changing the game and every moment matters. The transformational coaching and transformational against transactional coaching, and I think a lot of it can be related back to teaching. And I did a little bit of this, and we both did a bit of this when we were starting the podcast, and we did question, why do we teach? Why do I teach the way I do? What does it feel like to be taught by me? And how do I define success? And I think it's that inside out approach. Once you've got that right, and once you know yourself better, you can then be that such much more empathetic approach that can come across that Nick's talking about.
Yeah, it comes back to knowing yourself, doesn't it? Nick talked really well about collaborative leadership, you know, and about making sure other people are in with the decisions you make, which is crucial, and which is something I think all leaders should do. And that sort of collaborative element and that sort of setting a tone of getting people involved in that decision-making process linked in really well to Vanita Uppal, the director of the British School in New Delhi, when she talked about how teaching, and this is a conversation we've had several times about teaching, is, you know, you're just looking after the shirt, you know, you're just succession planning, you're just keeping a chair warm, and you're making sure that during your time that you do it, you and the team of people that you're leading in that collaborative manner just do the best they possibly can together to put the children and the school in a better position as they move forward. And it's not about who did it, and it's not about who gets the credit, and it's not about doing things other than for the fact that you want the school to progress and the children to have a better deal on it. And I really liked that. I thought that was a really lovely message from Vanita.
Yeah, the main thing I took from Vanita, was she talk about no ego? Was it leaving ego at the door?
There was a few people who talked about ego. I think it's usually us, to be honest. But Vanita did mention ego. Yeah, yeah, for sure she did. As did John O'Sullivan with the volleyball coach story. If you remember that one.
Yeah, that was brilliant, and it brings me back to thinking about Jolie in her new role at Cranley in Abu Dhabi, where she's gone on to senior leadership, and she's an incredibly positive person. And remember when she said that she got the email back from a teacher saying, "Joe, can you just stop being so enthusiastic?" Yeah. Remember that?
Yeah, I do.
And sometimes, yeah, you can almost be too positive and too enthusiastic and too into your job, and realize that you have to, not everybody wants that approach, and you have to sort of tailor your approach to your different personalities. We often talk about infinite learning. It's not a one size fits all. It is do the best you can for the different people you're dealing with, for the different contexts, for the different scenarios.
And probably brings up to wind this one in, Alan, is what's the one takeaway or the one or two takeaways that you've really felt strongly that you understand a bit more, or that you've come away from the last 3 or 4 months with?
That's a good one, mate. That is, for me, and I've said it already in this episode here, is about cultural architects and FIFO for me. I really feel strongly about that. Having people on board, particularly in a school or any organisation, you've got to be on board with the mission and vision. And we'll do everything we can to get you on the bus. I think, as Steve Wade said, getting on the bus. We'll do everything we can to get you on the bus. But if you're not going to be on the bus, it's fit in or leave. And I think I've took that on. That's the thing that resonates with me. But it's not like I'm harsh and I will want to get rid of people. I will help people and I will want to get people on side. But if they're not going to fit in at the end of the day, it's the Chris Wilder conversation that he's had many times over his Sheffield United managerial career. If a player's not right, it's thanks, brutal honesty, thanks, we're not going in the same direction, but I'm going to do my best to help you move on in the next step of your career. It's not like brutally, right, that's it, you don't fit in, you're not good enough. It's helping them along and helping them to find on. And the thing I take from Chris Wilder there, he's never had an ex-player that's gone out and slated him in the press like you hear with Mourinho and these other places. What about you?
For me, just the real constant message that there's no set way of doing any of this. There's no right or wrong way of doing it. You know, as long as you believe in what you're doing and you believe that what you're doing is right, go for it and learn and retest. You'll get things wrong as you go along, and people will need to be patient with you, and you'll need to be patient with other people. But if you're working hard in the right direction for what you want, whether it's your shared purpose, your why, your vision, the project goal, or where you want your friendship or your relationship to go, if you're doing your best, have that friendly roommate in your head. You know, let that friendly roommate share their thoughts, and don't let that roommate in your head get too negative, because you're working things out just like anybody else is, and you're not superhuman. You'll get things wrong as you go along. And that probably links into what I'd say is the second big takeaway, that you need to know yourself. I think so much time people spend trying to work out other people and work out, like you said earlier, you know, whether it's pedagogy or looking at teaching and learning or whatever it is, you know, but actually before you do any of that, take some time to check yourself and who you are and what really matters to you and how that works. And once you know who you are, be confident in that and go forward with it, and have some vigor and some assertion that that's who you are and that's how you want to go, but always be open to learning, you know. And it goes back to the first takeaway I had, where, you know, I just mentioned then about how important it is just to realize that you're never going to get it right all the time. You're going to make mistakes, and you just need to learn along the way.
I agree fully. And just to reiterate that about being yourself is don't try and copy what others are like, because it will come through. Your real personality will come through. You can't, well, I don't want to swear. I'm not going to swear. You can't hide that. People can see through you. And you've got to have your core values right, and you've got to have what your non-negotiables are. And I think that's a great starting point for anybody really listening as a new leader or even an existing leader. What are your core values? What do you stand for? And what are your non-negotiable behaviours? I think that's a great thing for me to take from this.
Yeah. Quality. I enjoyed that chat, Alan.
Yeah, cheers. Nice.
I'm not sure if anybody's listened to it and got to the end, but if you have, congratulations. let us know what you thought. You know, this one is just really just for us to reflect and think about what those takeaways have been, and just how powerful the last 3 or 4 months have been for both of us, personally, professionally. With so much change in the world and so much uncertainty, it's just been really, really pleasant to have positive, professional, forward-thinking, progressive conversations. And a huge lump of gratitude and a massive thank you to the 23 guests that we've had so far. And we look forward to having more. We're certainly not planning on stopping, which will be good news for some and not so good news for others. But we're not planning on stopping. We thoroughly enjoy what we're doing. And as ever, if you've got feedback, let us know. theinfinitelearners.com is where we're at. We need to spend a bit of time on that when we get the chance, probably around Christmas, in updating that one. Instagram, YouTube, and all podcast platforms. Until next time, we'll see you all. Take it easy.
See you guys. Thank you.
Bye-bye.